So
yeah,
if it's the priest talking, I don't want to send it to them.
What do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, it's a really nice chapter. It's a really nice chapter to start with. Everyone's going to feel good about it.
Beginning, yeah. Child-friendly beginning.
Yeah. Maybe we should just do this one chapter tonight and then just not do the rest.
We could just read the same chapter over and over.
Yeah. And then you're going to tell us again that everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, guys, everything is going to be okay.
I can also attest to Frankie's wonderful skills at sending you personalized messages of support in your particular situation.
Did you manage it?
I did.
Did you manage the wanky bullshit?
I mean, I didn't do all the wanky bullshit, but I did some, which is better than not doing any.
I knew you could. I knew you could.
Your belief is wonderful.
You're wonderful. You're freaking wonderful.
We're all wonderful.
How are we doing for time?
Story time.
Are we all met?
Can give it another minute.
Yeah. Oh, shout out. Shout out.
It's recording, so you can do shout outs.
We haven't got our party, the big bad adventurers are off doing exciting D&D things tonight. Yeah. So we don't have Bina, Catherine, Jen, Neville and Malcolm. So hello you guys, if you're watching this back. I hope you D&D'd sufficiently and that it all went well. Somebody help me out, I'm flailing here.
Are there other viewers who only watch the replays like Peter that you could do a shout out to?
Are there
only watch the replays?
Peter and Romain, I think, who only watched. I don't know who else only watched the catch up. But hi you guys! Everybody say hi.
Hi.
We miss you and we love you, and I hope you're having a good time whenever you're watching this.
Cool.
There we go.
Story time?
Story time?
Story time.
Story time. Right. Okay. So. Are you all sitting comfortably?
Wait.
Not the right answer.
It's a rhetorical question.
No. I really want to know. Are you all sitting comfortably? Okay.
Hey, hi all.
Hi Ben.
Hi.
You literally.
Hi. How are you?
No, we've done that. We've done that bit.
We're starting now. I'm going to mute you, Ben.
Now. It's quiet time. Right. Silence! Are we all sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Chapter 24. Sunday, March 9th. Armand came in early this morning for gossip and chocolate. Wearing a new blonde straw hat decorated with a red ribbon, she looked fresher and more vital than she appeared yesterday. The cane which she has taken to carrying is an affectation. Tied with a bright red bow, it looks like a little flag of defiance. She ordered chocolat viennois and a slice of my black and white layer cake, and sat down comfortably on a stool. Josephine, who is helping me in the shop for a few days until she decides what to do next, watched with a little apprehension from the kitchen. I heard there was some fuss last night, said Armand in her brusque way. The kindness in her bright black eyes redeems her forwardness. That lout Muscat, I heard, out here yelling and carrying on. I explained as blandly as I could. Armand listened appreciatively. I only wonder why she didn't leave him years ago, she said when I had finished. His father was just as bad, too free with their opinions, both of them, and with their hands. She nodded cheerily at Josephine, standing in the doorway with a pot of hot milk in one hand. Always knew you'd see sense one day, girl, she said. Don't let anyone talk you out of it now. Josephine smiled. Don't worry, she said. I won't. We had more customers this morning in La Praline than we have had on any Sunday since Anouk and I moved in. Our regulars, Guillaume, Narcisse, Arnaud, and a few others, said little, nodding kindly at Josephine and going on much as normal. Guillaume turned up at lunchtime with Anouk. In the excitement of the past couple of days, I had only spoken to him a couple of times, but as he walked in, I was struck by the abrupt change in him. Gone was his shrunken, diminished look. Now he walked with a jaunty step, and he was wearing a bright red scarf around his neck, which gave him an almost dashing air. From the corner of my eye, I saw a darkish blur at his feet. Pantoufle. Anouk ran past Guillaume, her satchel swinging carelessly, ducking under the counter to give me a kiss. Maman, she bugled in my ear. Guillaume's found a dog. I turned to look, my arms still full of Anouk. Guillaume was standing beside the door, his face flushed. At his feet, a small brown and white mongrel, no more than a puppy, lolled adoringly. Shh, Anouk. It isn't my dog. Guillaume's expression was a complex of pleasure and embarrassment. He was by Les Maraudes. I think maybe someone wanted to get rid of him. Anouk was feeding sugar lumps to the dog. Rue found him, she piped. Heard him crying down by the river. He told me so. Oh? You saw Rue? Anouk nodded absently and tickled the dog, who rolled over with a happy snarl. He's so cute, she said. Are you going to keep him? Guillaume smiled, a little sadly. I don't think so, sweetheart. You know, after Charlie. But he's lost. He hasn't anywhere else. I'm sure there are plenty of people willing to give a nice little dog like this a good home. Guillaume bent down and gently pulled the dog's ears. He's a friendly little chap, full of life. Insistently, what are you going to call him? Guillaume shook his head. I don't think I'll be keeping him for long enough for that, Mamie. Anouk gave me one of her comical looks, and I shook my head at her in silent warning. I thought perhaps you could put a card in the shop window, said Guillaume, sitting down at the counter, to see if anyone claims him, you know. I poured him a cup of mocha and set it down in front of him with a couple of Florentines on the side. Of course, I smiled. When I looked back a moment later, the dog was sitting on Guillaume's knee, eating the Florentines. Anouk looked at me and winked. Narcisse had brought me a basket of endives from his nursery and, seeing Josephine, handed her a little bunch of scarlet anemones which he took from his coat pocket, muttering that they would cheer the place up a bit. Josephine blushed, but looked pleased and tried to thank him. Narcisse shuffled off, embarrassed, gruffly disclaiming. After the kind came the curious. Word had spread during the sermon that Josephine Muscat had moved into La Praline, and there was a steady flow of visitors throughout the morning. Jolene Dreux and Carole Clermont arrived in their spring twin sets and silk headscarves with an invitation to a fundraising tea on Palm Sunday. Armand gave a delighted cackle on seeing them. My, it's the Sunday morning fashion parade, she explained. Carole looked annoyed. You really shouldn't be here, Maman, she said reproachfully. You know what the doctor said, don't you? I do indeed, said Armand. What's wrong? Aren't I dying fast enough for you? Is that why you have to send that death's head on a stick to spoil my morning? Caro's powdered cheeks reddened. Really, maman, you shouldn't say things like, I'll mind my mouth if you mind your business, snapped Armand smartly. And Caro almost chipped the tiles with her high heels in her haste to leave. Then Denise Arnaud came to see if we needed any extra bread. Just in case, she said, eyes gleaming with curiosity, seeing as now you have a guest and everything. I assured her that if we needed bread, we knew where to come. Then Charlotte Edouard, Lydie Perrin, Georges Desmoulins, one wanting an early birthday present, another details of the chocolate festival. Such an original idea, madame. Another had dropped a purse outside Saint-Jérôme and wondered whether I might have seen it. I kept Josephine behind the counter with one of my clean yellow aprons to protect her clothes from chocolate spillages, and she managed surprisingly well. She's taken pains with her appearance today. The red jumper and black skirt are neat and businesslike, the dark hair carefully secured with ribbon. Her smile is professional, her head high, and though her eyes occasionally drift towards the open door in anxious expectation, there is little in her bearing to suggest a woman in fear for herself or her reputation. Brazen, that's what she is, hissed Jolie Dru to Carole Clermont as they passed the door in haste. Quite brazen, when I think of what that poor man had to bear with. Josephine's back was turned, but I saw her stiffen. A lull in conversation made Joline's words very audible, and though Guillaume faked a coughing fit in order to cover them, I knew she had heard. There was a small, embarrassed silence. Then Armand spoke. Well, girl, you know you've made it when those doozies approve, she said briskly. Welcome to the wrong side of the tracks. Josephine gave her a sharp glance of suspicion. Then, as if reassured that the joke was not against her, she laughed. The sound was open, carefree. Surprised, she brought her hand to her mouth as if to check that the laughter belonged to her. That made her laugh all the more, and the others laughed with her. We were still laughing when the doorbell chimed, and Francis Reynaud came quietly into the shop. Monsieur le Curé. I saw her face change even before I saw him, becoming hostile and stupid, her hands returning to their accustomed position at the pit of her stomach. Reynaud nodded gravely. Madame Muscat? He placed special emphasis on the first word. I was sorry not to see you in church this morning. Josephine muttered something graceless and inaudible. Reynaud took a step towards the counter, and she half-turned as if to bolt into the kitchen, then thought better of it and turned to face him. That's right, girl, said Armand approvingly. Don't let him give you any of his jabber. She faced Reynaud and gestured sternly with a piece of cake. You let that girl alone, Francis. If anything, you should be giving her your blessing. Reynaud ignored her. Listen to me, ma fille, he said earnestly. We need to talk. His eyes went with some distaste to the red good luck sachet hanging by the door. Not in here. Josephine shook her head. I'm sorry. There's work to do. And I don't want to listen to anything you have to say. Reynaud's mouth set stubbornly. You have never needed the church as much as you need it now. A cold, rapid glance in my direction. You have weakened. You have allowed others to lead you astray. The sanctity of the marriage vow. Armand interrupted him again with a crow of derision. The sanctity of the marriage vow? Where did you dig that one up? I would have thought that you, of all people... Please, Madame Voisin. At last, a trace of expression in his flat voice. His eyes are wintry. I would be most appreciative if you would speak as you were raised to, snapped Armand. That mother of yours never taught you to talk with a potato in your mouth, did she? She gave a chuckle. Pretending we're better than the rest of us, are we? Forgot all about us at that fancy school? Renaud stiffened. I could feel the tension coming from him. He has definitely lost weight in the past few weeks, his skin stretched like a tambourine's across the dark hollows of his temple, the articulation of his jaw clearly visible beneath the meagre flesh. A lank diagonal of hair across his forehead gives him a slyly artless look. The rest is crisp-creased efficiency. Josephine. His voice was gentle, compelling, excluding the rest of us as effectively as if they had been alone. I know you want me to help you. I've talked to Paul Marie. He says you've been under a lot of strain. He says... Josephine shook her head. Mon père. The blank expression had left her face and she was serene. I know you mean well, but I'm not going to change my mind. But the sacrament of marriage. He looked agitated now, leaning forward against the counter with his face twisted in distress. His hands clutched at the padded surface as if for support. Another surreptitious glance at the bright sachet at the door. I know you have been confused. Others have influenced you. Meaningfully, if only we could speak in private. No. Her voice was firm. I'm staying here with Vianne. For how long? His voice registered dismay whilst trying for incredulity. Madame Rocher may be your friend, Josephine, but she's a businesswoman. She has a shop to run, a child to care for. How long will she tolerate a stranger in the house? This shot was more successful. I saw Josephine hesitate, the look of uncertainty back in her eyes. I'd seen it too often in my mother's face to mistake it, that look of disbelief, of fear. We don't need anyone but each other. A fierce, remembered whisper in the hot dark of some anonymous hotel room. What the hell would we want anyone else for? Brave words, and if there were tears, the darkness hid them. But I felt her shaking almost imperceptibly as she held me beneath the covers, like a woman in the throes of a fever. Perhaps that was why she fled them, those kind men, kind women who wanted to befriend, to love, to understand her. We were contagious, fevered with mistrust, the pride we carried with us, the last refuge of the unwanted. I'm offering Josephine a job here with me. I made my voice sweet and brittle. I'm going to need a lot of extra help if I'm to have time to prepare the chocolate festival for Easter. His look, finally unveiled, was stark with hatred. I'll train her in the basics of chocolate making, I continued. She can cover for me in the shop while I work in the back. Josephine was looking at me with an expression of hazy astonishment. I winked at her. She'll be doing me a favour, and I'm sure the money will come in useful for her too, I said smoothly. And as for staying... I spoke to her directly, fixing her eyes with mine. Josephine, you're welcome to stay for as long as you like. It's a pleasure to have you here. Armande cackled. So you see, mon père, she said gleefully, you needn't waste any more of your time. Everything seems to be going just fine without you. She sipped chocolate with an air of concentrated naughtiness. A drink of this might do you good, she suggested. You're looking peaky, Francis. Been hitting the communion wine again, have you? He gave her a smile like a clenched fist. Very droll, madame. It's good that you haven't lost your sense of humour. Then he turned smartly on his heels, and with a nod and a curt messer down to the customers, he was gone, like the polite Nazi in a bad war film. Chapter 25. Monday, March 10th. Their laughter followed me out of the shop and into the street like a volley of birds. The scent of chocolate, like that of my anger, made me light-headed, almost euphoric with rage. We were right, Père. This vindicates us completely. By striking at the three areas closest to us, the community, the church's festivals, and now one of its holiest sacraments, she reveals herself at last. Her influence is pernicious and fast-growing, seeding already into 24 fertile minds. I saw the season's first dandelion in the churchyard this morning, wedged in the space behind a gravestone. It has already grown far deeper than I can reach, thick as a finger, searching out the darkness beneath the stone. In a week's time, the whole plant will have grown again, stronger than before. I saw Muscat for communion this morning, though he was not present for confession. He looks drawn and angry, uncomfortable in his Sunday clothes. He has taken his wife's departure badly. When I left the chocolaterie, he was waiting for me, smoking, leaning against the small arch beside the main entrance. Well, Père? I have spoken to your wife. When is she coming home? I shook my head. I would not like to give you false hope, I said gently. She's a stubborn cow, he said, dropping his cigarette and crunching it with his heel. Pardon my language, Père, but that's how it is. When I think of the things I gave up for that crazy bitch, the money she's cost me. She too has had much to bear, I told him meaningfully, thinking of our many sessions in the confessional. Muscat shrugged. Oh, I'm not an angel, he said. I know my weaknesses. But tell me, Père, he spread his hands appealingly, didn't I have some reason? Waking up to her stupid face every morning, catching her time and again with her pockets full of stolen stuff from the market, lipsticks and bottles of perfume and jewelry, having everyone looking at me in church and laughing, huh? He looked at me winningly. Huh, Père? Haven't I had my own cross to bear? I'd heard much of this before. Her sluttishness, her stupidity, her thieving, her laziness about the house. I am not required to have an opinion on such things. My role is to offer advice and comfort. Still, he disgusts me with his excuses, his conviction that had it not been for her, he might have achieved great, brave things. We are not here to allocate blame, I said with a note of rebuke. We should be trying to find ways to save your marriage. He was instantly subdued. I'm sorry, Père. I shouldn't have said those things. He tried for sincerity, showing teeth like ancient ivory. Don't think I'm not fond of her, Père. I mean, I want her back, don't I? Oh, yes. To cook his meals, to iron his clothes, to run his cafe, and to prove to his friends that no one makes a fool of poor Marie Muscat. No one. I despise this hypocrisy. He must indeed win her back. I agree with that, at least. But not for those reasons. If you want her back, Muscat, I told him with some tartness, then you have been about it in a remarkably idiotic way so far. He bridled. I don't see that necessarily. Don't be a fool. Lord, Père, how can you have ever had such patience with these people? Threats, profanities, last night's shameful drunken display. How do you think that would help your case? Sullenly. I couldn't let her get away with what she did, Père. Everyone's saying my wife walked out on me. And that interfering bitch Rocher. His mean eyes narrowed behind his wire glasses. Serve her right if something happened to that fancy shop of hers, he said flatly. Get rid of the bitch for good. I looked at him sharply. Oh? It was too close to what I have thought myself, mon père. God help me, when I saw that boat burning. It is a primitive delight, unworthy of my calling, a pagan thing which by right I should not feel. I have wrestled with it myself, père, in the small hours of the mornings. I have subdued it in myself, but like the dandelions it grows back, sending out insidious small rootlets. It was perhaps because of this, because I understood, that my voice was harsher than I intended as I replied. What kind of thing did you have in mind, Muscat? He muttered something barely audible. A fire, perhaps? A convenient fire? I could feel the pressure of my rage growing against my ribs. Its taste, which is both metallic and sweetly rotten, filled my mouth, like the fire which got rid of the gypsies. He smirked. Perhaps. Dreadful fire risk, some of these old houses. Listen to me. Suddenly I was appalled at the thought that he might have mistaken my silence that night for complicity. If I thought, even suspected, outside of the confessional that you were involved in such a thing, if anything happens to that shop. I had him by the shoulder now, my fingers digging into the pulpy flesh. Muscat looked aggrieved. But, père, you said yourself that... I said nothing. I heard my voice ricochet flatly across the square, tat, 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 and I lowered it in haste. I certainly never meant for you. I cleared my throat, which suddenly felt wedged full. This is not the Middle Ages, Muscat, I said crisply. We do not interpret God's laws to suit ourselves, or the laws of our country, I added heavily, looking him in the eye. His corneas were as yellow as his teeth. Do we understand each other? Resentfully. Yes, mon père. Because if anything happens, Muscat, anything, a broken window, a little fire, anything at all, I overtop him by a head. I am younger, fitter than he. He responds instinctively to the physical threat. I give him a little push which sends him against the stone wall at his back. I can barely contain my rage. That he should dare to take my role, père. That it should be he, this miserable, self-deluding sot. That he should place me in this situation, to be obliged officially to protect the woman who is my enemy. I contain myself with an effort. Keep well away from that shop, Muscat. If there's anything to be done, I'll do it. Do you understand? Humbler now, his bluster evaporating. Yes, père. Leave the situation entirely to me. 3 weeks until her grand festival. That's all I have left. 3 weeks to find some way of curbing her influence. I have preached against her in church to no effect but my own ridicule. Chocolate, I am told, is not a moral issue. Even the Clermonts see my obduracy as slightly irregular, she simpering with mock concern that I seem overwrought, he grinning outright. Vian Rocher herself takes no notice. Far from trying to blend in, she flaunts her alien status, calling impertinent greetings to me across the square, encouraging the antics of such as Armand, perpetually dogged by the children whose growing wildness she invites. Even in a crowd, she is instantly recognizable. Where others walk up a street, she runs down it. Her hair, her clothes, perpetually wind-torn, wildflower colours, orange and yellow and polka-dotted and floral patterned. In the wild, a parakeet amongst sparrows would soon be torn apart for its bright plumage. Here, she is accepted with affection, even amusement. What might raise eyebrows elsewhere is tolerated because it is only Vian. Even Clermont is not impervious to her charm, and his wife's dislike has nothing to do with moral superiority and everything to do with a kind of envy which does Caro little credit. At least Vian Rocher is no hypocrite, using God's words to elevate her social standing. And yet the thought, suggesting as it does a sympathy, even a liking, that a man in my position can ill afford, is another danger. I can have no sympathies. Rage and liking are equally inappropriate. I must be impartial for the sake of the community and the church. Those are my first loyalties. Another chapter?
Of course.
Chapter 26. Wednesday, March 12th. We have not spoken to Muscat for days. Josephine, who for some time would not leave La Praline, can now be persuaded to walk down the street to the bakery or across the square to the florist's without me to accompany her. As she refuses to return to the Café de la République, I have lent her some of my own clothes. Today she is wearing a blue jumper and a flowered sarong, and she looks fresh and pretty. In only a few days she has changed. The look of vapid hostility has gone, as have the defensive mannerisms. She seems taller, sleeker, abandoning her permanently hunched posture and the multiple layers of clothing which gave her such a dumpy look. She keeps the shop for me while I work in the kitchen, and I have already taught her how to temper and blend chocolate types, as well as how to make some of the simpler types of praline. She has good, quick hands. Laughingly, I remind her of her gunslinger's deftness on that first day, and she flushes. I'd never take anything from you. Her indignation is touching, sincere. Vian, you don't think I'd... Of course not. You know Of course. She and Armand, who barely knew each other in the old days, have become good friends. The old lady calls every day now, sometimes to talk, sometimes for a cornet of her favourite apricot truffles. Often she comes in with Guillaume, who has become a regular visitor. Today Luc was here too, and the three of them sat together in the corner with a pot of chocolate and some eclairs. I could hear occasional laughter and exclamations from the small group. Just before closing time, Roux walked in, looking cautious and diffident. It was the first time I had seen him close to since the fire, and I was struck by the changes in him. He looks thinner, his hair pasted back from a blank, sullen face. There is a dirty bandage on one hand. One side of his face still shows a hectic splash of marks which resembles bad sunburn. He looked taken aback when he saw Josephine. I'm sorry, I thought Vian was... He turned abruptly as if to go. No, please, she's in the back. Her manner has become more relaxed since she began working in the shop, but she sounded awkward, intimidated perhaps by his appearance. Roux hesitated. You're from the cafe, he said at last. You're Josephine Bonnet, she interrupted. I'm living here now. Oh. I came out of the kitchen and saw him watching her with a speculative look in his light eyes. But he did not pursue the matter any further, and Josephine withdrew gratefully into the kitchen. It's good to see you again, Roux, I said to him directly. I wanted to ask you a favour. Oh? He can make a single syllable sound very meaningful. This was polite incredulity, suspicion. He looked like a nervous cat about to strike. I need some work doing on the house, and I wonder if you might... It is difficult to phrase this correctly. I know he will not accept what he considers to be charity. This wouldn't be anything to do with our friend Armand, would it? His tone was light but hard. He turned to where Armand and the others were sitting. "Doing good by stealth again, were we?" he called caustically. Turning back to me again, his face was careful and expressionless. "I didn't come here to ask for a job. I wanted to ask if you saw anyone hanging around my boat that night." I shook my head. "I'm sorry, Rue. I didn't see anyone." "Okay." He turned again as if to leave. "Thanks." "Look, wait," I called out after him. "Can't you at least stay for a drink?" "Some other time." His tone was brusque to the point of rudeness. I could feel his anger reaching out for something to strike at. "We're still your friends," I said as he reached the door. "Armand and Luc and I. Don't be so defensive. We're trying to help you." Rue turned abruptly. His face was bleak. His eyes were crescent. "Get this, all of you." He spoke in a low, hateful voice, the accent so thick that his words were barely distinguishable. "I don't need any help. I should never have got involved with you in the first place. I only hung around this long because I thought I might find out who fired my boat." Then he was gone, stumbling bearishly through the doorway in a bright, angry carillon of chimes. When he had gone, we all looked at each other. "Red-haired men," said Armand with feeling. "Stubborn as mules." Josephine looked shaken. "What a horrible man," she said at last. "You didn't set fire to his boat. What right has he to take it out on you?" I shrugged. "He feels helpless and angry, and he doesn't know who to blame," I told her gently. "It's a natural reaction. And he thinks we're offering help because we feel sorry for him." "I just hate scenes," said Josephine, and I knew she was thinking of her husband. "I'm glad he's gone." "Do you think he'll leave Lansquenet now?" I shook my head. "I don't think so," I said. "After all, where would he go?" End of the chapter.
More?
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 Still
More?
More.
Are you happy to do more?
More? No, that's a kinder question than mine.
Not even 3 to 10, come on.
How long's the next chapter?
It's quite a long one. It's not like, I mean, they're all relatively short, but it is quite a long one.
It's only 20 to 10.
Yeah.
More?
I would say one more chapter then, and then let's leave it.
That works for me.
What happens in the chapter? Is it a good chapter?
Is it going to be a very depressing end?
Yeah, that's a good question. Is it a good chapter?
Let's see.
See how we feel at the end of it.
Protect us from the world, Frankie.
Y'all are so demanding.
Protect us, Frankie. You are our only hope.
Jesus.
The Frankie O'Porter. Save us.
I love you all so much. I think it's going to be okay.
Yay!
Okay.
Wait, hold on. You usually say it's definitely all going to be okay.
It is definitely all going to be okay. In a cosmic sense, everything is going to be fine. In this specific sense, I think it'll be all right.
Sounds all right.
Right. Are you all sitting comfortably?
Of course.
Then I'll begin. Chapter 27. Thursday, March 13th. I went down to Les Maraudes yesterday afternoon to talk to Rue, with no more success than last time. The derelict house has been padlocked from the inside and the shutters closed. I can imagine him holed up in the dark with his rage like a wary animal. I called his name and knew he heard me, but he did not answer. I considered leaving a message for him on the door, but decided against it. If he wants to come, it must be on his own terms. Anouk came with me, carrying a paper boat I had made for her out of the cover of a magazine. As I was standing outside Rue's door, she went down the banking to launch it, keeping it from drifting too far with the aid of a long, flexible branch. When Rue would not make an appearance, I returned to La Praline, where Josephine had already begun the week's batch of couverture and left Anouk to her own devices. Watch out for crocodiles, I told her seriously. Anouk grinned at me from under her yellow beret. With her toy trumpet in one hand and the guiding stick in the other, she proceeded to sound a loud and tuneless alarm, jumping from one foot to the other in mounting excitement. "Crocodiles! Crocodile attack!" she crowed. "Man the cannons!" "Steady," I warned. "Don't fall in." Anouk blew me an extravagant kiss and returned to the game. When I turned back at the top of the hill, she was bombarding the crocodiles with pieces of turf, and I could still hear the thin blare of the trumpet interspersed with sound effects as battle continued. Surprising that it should still surprise, the fierce onrush of tenderness. If I squint hard enough against the low sunlight, I can almost see the crocodiles, the long brown snapping shapes in the water, the flash of the cannon. As she moves between the houses, the red and yellow of her coat and beret shooting out sudden flares from the shadows, I can almost make out the half-visible menagerie which surrounds her. As I watch, she turns and waves at me, screeches, "I love you!" and returns to the serious business of play. We were closed in the afternoon, and Josephine and I worked hard enough to make pralines and truffles to last the rest of the week. I have already begun to make the Easter chocolates, and Josephine has become skilled at decorating the animal shapes and packing them into boxes tied with multicolored ribbon. The cellar is an ideal place to store them. Cool, though not so cold that the chocolate takes on the whitish bloom which refrigeration encourages. Dark and dry, so we can store all of our special stock there, packed into cartons, and still have room for our household supplies. The floor is made of old flagstones, polished brown as oak, cool and smooth underneath. A single light bulb overhead. The door to the cellar is bare pine, with a hole cut into the base for a long-departed cat. Even Anouk likes the cellar, which smells of stone and ancient wine, and she has drawn coloured chalk figures on the flags and the whitewashed walls, animals and castles and birds and stars. In the shop, Armand and Luc stayed to talk for a while, then they left together. They meet more often now, though not always at La Praline. Luc tells me that he went to her house twice last week and did an hour's work in the garden each time. She needs some work doing in the flower beds now the house is fixed, he told me earnestly. She can't manage the digging the way she used to, but she says she wants some flowers this year instead of just weeds. Yesterday, he brought a tray of plants from Narcisse's nursery and planted them in the newly dug soil at the foot of Armand's wall. "I've got lavenders and primroses and tulips and daffodils," he explained. "She likes the bright, scented ones best. She doesn't see all that well, so I got lilac and wallflowers and broom and things she'll notice." He smiled shyly. "I want them settled before her birthday," he explained. I asked him when Armand's birthday was. "March the 28th, he explained. "She'll be 81. I've already thought of a present." "Oh?" He nodded. "I thought I'd buy her a silk slip." His tone was faintly defensive. "She likes underwear." Suppressing a smile, I told him that sounded like a fine idea. "I'll have to go to Agen," he said seriously, "and I'll have to hide it from my mother or she'll have a bird." He gave a sudden grin. "Perhaps we could throw a party for her. You know, to welcome her into the next decade." "We could ask her what she thinks," I suggested. At 4, Anouk came home tired and cheerful and muddy to the armpits, and Josephine made lemon tea while I ran the bathwater. Stripping off her dirty clothes, I tipped Anouk into the hot, honey-scented water. Then afterwards we all sat down to pain au chocolat and brioche with raspberry jam and plump sweet apricots from Narcisse's greenhouse. Josephine seemed preoccupied, turning her apricot softly over and over in one palm. I keep thinking about that man, she said at last. You know, the one who was in this morning. Rue. She nodded. His boat catching fire, she said tentatively. You don't think it could have been an accident, do you? He doesn't think so. He said he smelt petrol. What do you think he would do if he found out, with an effort, who did it? I shrugged. I really don't know. Why, Josephine, have you any idea who it was? Quickly. No. But if someone did know, and didn't tell, she let the phrase falter miserably, would he, I mean, what would... I looked at her. She refused to meet my gaze, rolling the apricot absently over and over across her hands. I caught a sudden glimpse of smoke from her thoughts. You know who it was, don't you? No. Look, Josephine, if you know something, I don't know anything. Her voice was flat. I wish I did. It's all right. No one's blaming you. I made my voice gentle, coaxing. I don't know anything, she repeated shrilly. I really don't. Besides, he's leaving. He said so. He isn't from here, and he should never have been here, and... She bit off the phrase with an audible clink of her teeth. I saw him this afternoon, said Anouk through a mouthful of brioche. I saw his house. I turned to her in some curiosity. He talked to you? She nodded emphatically. Of course he did. He said he'd make me a boat next time, a proper wooden one that won't sink. That if the bustards don't set that afire too. She manages his accent very well. In her mouth, the ghosts of his words snarl and prance. I turned away to hide a smile. His house is cool, continued Anouk. There's a fire in the middle of the carpet. He said I could come whenever I liked. Oh, she put a guilty hand to her mouth. He said, as long as I didn't tell you. She sighed theatrically. And I did, maman, didn't I? I hugged her, laughing. You did. I could see Josephine looking alarmed. I don't think you ought to go into that house, she told her anxiously. You don't really know that man, Anouk. He could be violent. I think she's all right. I winked at Anouk, as long as she does tell me. Anouk winked back. Today there was a funeral, one of the old people from Les Mimosas down the river, and business was slow out of fear or respect. The deceased was a woman of 94, says Clotilde at the florist's, a relative of Narcisse's dead mother. I saw Narcisse, his one concession to the occasion being a black tie with his old tweed jacket, and Renaud standing starkly in the doorway in his black and white, his silver cross in one hand and the other extended benevolently to welcome the mourners. These were few. Maybe a dozen old women, none of whom I recognized, one in a wheelchair pushed by a blonde nurse, some round and birdy like Armande, some with the almost translucent thinness of the very old, all in black stockings and bonnets and headscarves, some in gloves, others with their pale, twisted hands clasped to their flattened breasts like Grunwald virgins. I saw mainly their heads as they made their way into Saint-Jérôme's in a tight, softly clucking group. Among the lowered heads, the occasional grey-faced glance, bright black eyes flicking suspiciously at me from the safety of the enclave while the nurse, competent and resolutely cheery, pushed from the back. They seemed to feel no distress. The wheelchair-bound one held a small black missal in one hand and sang in a high, mewing voice as they entered the church. The rest remained silent for the most part, bobbing their heads at Reynaud as they passed into the darkness, some handing him a black-bordered note to read out during the service. The village's only hearse arrived late. Inside, a black-draped coffin with a lone spray of flowers. A single bell sounded flatly. As I waited in the empty shop, I heard the organ play a few listless, fugitive notes, like pebbles dropping into a well. Josephine, who was in the kitchen taking out a batch of chocolate cream meringues, came in quietly and shuddered. "It's gruesome," she said. I remember the city crematorium, the piped organ music, Bach toccata, the cheap shiny casket, the smell of polish and flowers. The minister pronounced Mother's name wrong, Jean Rocher. It was all over within 10 minutes. "Death should be a celebration," she told me, "like a birthday. I want to go up like a rocket when my time comes and fall down in a cloud of stars and hear everyone go, ah." I scattered her ashes across the harbour on the night of the 4th of July. There were fireworks and candy floss and cherry bombs blatting off the pier and the sharp burn of cordite in the air and the smell of hot dogs and frying onions and the faint whiff of garbage from the water. It was all the America she had ever dreamed of, a giant amusement park, neons flaring, music playing, crowds of people singing and jostling, all the slick and sentimental tawdriness she loved. I waited for the brightest part of the display, when the sky was a trembling eruption of light and colour, and I let them drift softly into the slipstream, turning blue-white-red as they fell. I would have said something, but nothing seemed to be left to say. "Gruesome," repeated Josephine. "I hate funerals. I never go to them." I said nothing, but watched the silent square and listened to the organ. At least it wasn't the same toccata. Undertaker's assistants carried the coffin into the church. It looked very light, and their steps were brisk and barely reverent on the cobbles. "I wish we weren't so close to the church," said Josephine restlessly. "I can't think with that going on right next door." "In China, people wear white at funerals," I told her. "They give out presents in bright red packages for luck. They light firecrackers. They talk and laugh and dance and cry. And at the end, everyone jumps over the embers of the funeral pyre, one by one, to bless the smoke as it rises." She looked at me curiously. "Did you live there too?" I shook my head. "No, but we knew plenty of Chinese people in New York. For them, death was a celebration of the dead person's life." Josephine looked doubtful. "I don't see how anyone can celebrate dying," she said at last. "You don't," I told her. "Life is what you celebrate. All of it. Even its end." I took the pot of chocolate from the hot plate and poured 2 glasses. After a while, I went into the kitchen for 2 meringues, which were still warm and treacly inside their chocolate envelopes, and served with thick creme chantilly and chopped hazelnuts. "It doesn't seem right, doing this at this moment," said Josephine. But I noticed she ate anyway. It was almost noon when the mourners left, dazed and blinking in the bright sunshine. The chocolate and meringues were all finished, the dark kept at bay for a little longer. I saw Reynaud at the doorway again, then the old women went away in their minibus, Les Mimosas lettered on the side in bright yellow, and the square was back to normal again. Narcisse came in when he had seen off the mourners, sweating heavily in his tight collar. When I gave him my condolences, he gave a shrug. "Never really knew her," he said indifferently. "Great aunt of my wife's. Went off to Le Mortoir 20 years ago. Her mind was gone." Le Mortoir. I saw Josephine grimace at the name. Behind all its mimosa sweetness, that's all it is, after all. a place in which to die. Narcisse is merely following convention. The woman was long dead already. I poured chocolate, black and bittersweet. Would you like a slice of cake? I offered. He deliberated for a moment. Better not while I'm in mourning, he declared obscurely. What kind is it? Bavarois with caramel icing. Perhaps a little slice. Josephine was looking out of the window again into the empty square. That man's hanging about again, she observed. The one from Les Maraudes. He's going into the church. I looked out of the door. Roux was standing just in the side doorway of Saint-Jérôme. He looked agitated, shifting uneasily from one foot to the other, his arms clasped tightly around his body as if he were cold. Something was wrong. I felt a sudden, panicky certainty. Something was very wrong. As I watched, Roux turned abruptly towards La Praline. He half ran into the doorway and remained there, head lowered, rigid with guilt and misery. It's Armande, he said. I think I've killed her. For a moment we stared at him. He made a helpless, awkward little gesture with his hands, as if to ward off bad thoughts. I was going to get the priest. She doesn't have a phone, and I thought perhaps he... He broke off. Distress had thickened his accent so that his words were exotic and incomprehensible, a language of strange gutturals and ululations which might have been Arabic, Spanish, or Verlan, or an arcane melding of all three. I could see she told me to go to the fridge, and there was medicine in there. He broke off again in increasing agitation. I didn't touch her. I never touched her. I wouldn't. He spat the words out with an effort, like broken teeth. They'll say I attacked her. I wanted to take her money. It isn't true. I gave her some brandy and she just... He stopped. I could see him struggling to maintain control. It's all right, I told him calmly. You can tell me on the way down. Josephine can stay with the shop. Narcisse can phone the doctor from the florists. Stubbornly, I'm not going back there. I've done what I could. I don't want... I grabbed him by the arm and pulled him after me. We haven't got time for this. I need you with me. They'll say it was my fault. The police. Armande needs you. Now come on. On the way to Les Maraudes, I heard the rest of the disjointed tale. Roux, feeling ashamed of his outburst in La Praline the previous day, and seeing Armande's door open, decided to call on her and found her sitting half-conscious in her rocking chair. He managed to rouse her enough for her to speak a few words. Medicine. Fridge. On top of the refrigerator was a bottle of brandy. He poured a glassful, forced some of the liquid between her lips. She just slumped. I couldn't get her to come round. Distress ebbed from him. Then I remembered she was a diabetic. I probably killed her trying to help. You didn't kill her. I was out of breath with running, a stitch cramping my left side. She'll be all right. You got help in time. What if she dies? Who do you think will believe me? His voice was harsh. Save your breath. The doctor will be here soon. Armande's door is still open, a cat wound halfway around the frame. Beyond it, the house is still. A piece of loosened guttering spouts rainwater from the roof. I see Roux's eyes flick to it in sudden professional appraisal. I'll have to fix that. He pauses at the door as if waiting to be invited in. Armande is lying on the hearthrug, her face a dull mushroom colour, her lips bluish. At least he has put her in the recovery position, and one arm pillows the head, neck at an angle to free the airways. She is motionless, but a tremor of stale air between her lips tells me she is breathing. Her discarded tapestry lies beside her, a cup of spilled coffee forming a comma-shaped stain on the rug. The scene is strangely flat, like a still from a silent film. Her skin beneath my fingers is cold and fishy, her dark irises clearly visible beneath eyelids as thin as wet crepe. Her black skirt is ridden up a little over her knees, revealing a crimson ruffle. I feel a sudden flare of sorrow for her arthritic old knees in their black stockings and the bright silk petticoats beneath the drab house dress. Well, anxiety makes Rue snarl. I think she'll be all right. His eyes are dark with disbelief and suspicion. She must have some insulin in the fridge, I tell him. That must have been what she meant. Get it quickly. She keeps it with the eggs. A Tupperware box contains 6 ampules of insulin and some disposable needles. On the other side, a box of truffles with La Céleste praline lettered on the lid. Otherwise, there is hardly anything to eat in the house. An open tin of sardines, a piece of paper with a smear of rillette, some tomatoes. I inject her in the crook of the elbow. It is a technique I know well. During the final stages of the disease for which my mother tried so many alternative therapies, acupuncture, homeopathy, creative visualization, we eventually fell back on good old morphine. Black market morphine when we couldn't get it on prescription. And though my mother loathed drugs, she was happy to get it, with her body sweltering and the towers of New York swimming before her eyes like a mirage. Armande weighs almost nothing in my arms, her head lolling loosely. A trace of rouge on one cheek gives her a desperate, clownish look. I press her cold, rigid hands between my own, loosening the joints, working at the fingers. Armande, wake up. Armande. Rue stands watching, uncertain, his expression a blur of confusion and hope. Her fingers feel like a bunch of keys in my hands. Armande. I make my voice sharp, commanding. You can't sleep now. You have to wake up. There it is. The smallest of tremors, a leaf fluttering against another. Vianne. In a second, Rue was on his knees beside us. He looked ashen, but his eyes were very bright. Oh, say it again, you stubborn old woman. His relief was so intense it hurt. I know you're in there, Armande. I know you can hear me. He looked at me, eager, almost laughing. She spoke, didn't she? I didn't imagine it. I shook my head. She's strong, I said, and you found her in time before she lapsed into coma. Give the injection time to act. Keep talking to her. Okay. He began to talk, a little wildly, breathlessly, looking into her face for signs of consciousness. I continued to rub her hands, feeling the warmth return little by little. You're not fooling anyone, Armande, you old witch. You're as strong as a horse. You could live forever. Besides, I've just fixed her roof. You don't think I did all that work just so that daughter of yours could inherit the lot, do you? I know you're listening, Armande. I know you can hear me. What are you waiting for? Do you want me to apologize? Okay, I apologize. Tears marbled his face. Do you hear that? I've apologized. I'm an ungrateful bastard, and I'm sorry. Now wake up and... Loud bastard. He stopped mid-sentence. Armande gave a tiny chuckle. Her lips moved soundlessly. Her eyes were bright and aware. Rue cupped her face gently in his hands. Scared you, did I? Her voice was laced in. No. I did, though, with a trace of satisfaction and mischief. Rue wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You still owe me money for the work I did, he said in a shaky voice. I was only scared you'd never get round to paying me. Armande chuckled again. She was gaining strength now, and between us we managed to lift her into the chair. She was still very pale, her face half collapsed into itself like a rotten apple, but her eyes were clear and lucid. Rue turned towards me, his expression unguarded for the first time since the fire. Our hands touched. For a second, I caught a glimpse of his face in moonlight, the rounded curve of a bare shoulder against grass. a lingering ghost scent of lilac. I felt my eyes widen in stupid surprise. Rue must have felt something too, because he stepped back, abashed. Behind us, I heard a soft chuckle from Armand. I told Narcisse to phone the doctor, I told her with a pretense at lightness. He'll be here any minute. Armand looked at me. Knowledge passed between us, and, not for the first time, I wondered just how clearly she saw things. I'm not having that death's head in my house, she said. You can send him right back where he came from. I don't need him telling me what to do. But you're ill, I protested. If Rue hadn't come along, you might have died. She gave me one of her mocking looks. Viens, she said patiently. That's what old people do. They die. It's a fact of life. Happens all the time. Yes, but, and I'm not going to Les Mortoirs, she continued. You can tell them that from me. They can't force me to go. I've lived in this house for 60 years, and when I die, it's going to be here. No one's going to force you to go anywhere, said Rue sharply. You were careless with your medication, that's all. You'll know better next time. Armand smiled. It isn't quite that simple, she said. Stubbornly, why not? She shrugged. Guillaume knows, she told him. I've been talking to him quite a lot. He understands. She sounded almost normal now, though she was still weak. I don't want to take this medicine every day, she said calmly. I don't want to follow endless diet sheets. I don't want to be waited on by kind nurses who talk to me as if I were in kindergarten. I'm 80 years old, for crying out loud, and if I can't be trusted to know what I want at my age... She broke off abruptly. Who's that? There's nothing wrong with her hearing. I heard it too, the faint sound of a car drawing up on the uneven pathway outside. The doctor. If it's that sanctimonious quack, tell him he's wasting his time, snapped Armand. Tell him I'm fine. Tell him to go find someone else to diagnose. I don't want him. I glanced outside. He seems to have brought half of Lansquenet with him, I remarked mildly. The car, a blue Citroën, was packed with people. As well as the doctor, a pallid man in a charcoal suit, I could see Caroline Clermont, her friend Jolene and Renaud crammed together on the back seat. The front was occupied by Georges Clermont, looking sheepish and uncomfortable, silently remonstrating. I heard the car door slam and the pee-wit shrill of Caroline's voice soaring above the sudden clamour. I told her! Didn't I tell her, Georges? No one could accuse me of neglecting my filial duty. I gave my all for that woman. Look how she... A quick crunch-criss of steps across the stones. Then the voices flared into cacophony as the unwanted visitors opened the front door. Maman? Maman? Hold on, darling. It's me. I'm coming. This way, Monsieur Coussenet. This way to the... Oh, yes, you know your way around, don't you? Oh, dear, the times I've told her. Positively knew something like this was going to happen. Georges, feebly protesting. Do you really think we ought to interfere, Caro, darling? I mean, let the doctor get on with it, you know. Jolene, in her cool, supercilious tone. One does wonder what he was doing in her house in any case. Renaud, barely audible, should have come to me. I felt Rue stiffen even before they came into the room, looking quickly round for a way out. Even as he did, it was too late. First Caroline and Jolene with their immaculate chignon, their twin sets and Hermès scarf, closely followed by Clermont. Dark suit and tie, unusual for a day at the lumberyard, or did she make him change for the occasion? And the doctor, the priest, like a scene from a melodrama, all frozen in the doorway. Faces shocked, bland, guilty, aggrieved, furious. Rue staring them out with that look of insolence, one hand bandaged, damp hair in his eyes. Myself by the door, orange skirt mud-splashed from my run down to Les Maraudes, and Armand. white but composed, rocking cheerily in her old chair with her black eyes snapping with malice and one finger crooked, witch-like. So, the vultures are here. She sounded affable, dangerous. Didn't take you long to get here, did it? A sharp glance at Renaud, standing at the rear of the group. Thought you'd got your chance at last, did you? She asked acidly. Thought you'd slip in a quick blessing or two while I wasn't compos mentis? She gave her vulgar chuckle. Too bad, Francis. I'm not quite ready for last rites yet. Renaud looked sour. So it would appear, he said. A quick glance in my direction. It was fortunate that Mademoiselle Rocher is so competent in the use of needles. There was an implicit sneer in the words. Caroline was rigid, her face a smiling mask of chagrin. Maman, chérie, you see what happens when you leave you on your own, frightening everyone like this. Armand looked bored. Taking up all this time, putting people out? La Reflette jumped up onto her knee as Carol was talking, and the old lady stroked the cat absently. Now do you understand why we tell you that I'd be better off in Les Mortoirs? Finished Armand flatly. Really, Carol, you don't give up, do you? That's your father all over, you know. Stupid, but persistent. It was one of his most endearing characteristics. Carol looked petulant. It isn't Les Mortoirs, it's Les Mimosas, and if you'd only have a look round. Food through a tube, someone to take you to the toilet in case you fall over. Don't be absurd. Armand laughed. My dear girl, at my age I can be anything I please. I can be absurd if I feel like it. I'm old enough to get away with anything. Now you're behaving like a child. Carol's voice was sulky. Les Mimosas is a very fine, very exclusive residential home. You'd be able to talk to people your own age, go on outings, have everything organized for you. It sounds quite wonderful. Armand continued to rock lazily in her chair. Caro turned to the doctor, who had been standing awkwardly at her side. A thin, nervy man, he looked embarrassed to be there at all, like a shy man at an orgy. Simon, tell her. Well, I'm not sure it's really my place to. Simon agrees with me, interrupted Caro doggedly. In your condition and at your age, you simply can't go on living here on your own. Why, at any time you might. Yes, Madame Voisin. Jolene's voice was warm and reasonable. Perhaps you should consider what Caro. I mean, of course you don't want to lose your independence, but for your own good. Armand's eyes are quick and bright and abrasive. She stared at Jolene for a few moments in silence. Jolene bridled, then looked away, blushing. I want you out of here, said Armand gently. All of you. But, maman, all of you, replied Armand flatly. I'll give the quack here 2 minutes in private. Seems I need to remind you of your Hippocratic oath, Monsieur Coussinet. And by the time I've finished with him, I expect the rest of you buzzards to be gone. She tried to stand, pushing herself up from her chair with difficulty. I took her arm to steady her, and she gave me a wry, mischievous smile. Thanks, Vianne, she said gently. You too. This was Theroux, still standing at the far side of the room, looking drab and indifferent. I want to talk to you when I've seen the doctor. Don't go away. Who? Me? Roux was uneasy. Caro glanced at him with undisguised contempt. I think that at a time like this, maman, your family should be the. If I need you, I know where to call, said Armand tartly. For the moment, I want to make arrangements. Caro looked at Roux. Oh? The syllable was silky with dislike. Arrangements? She flicked her eyes up and down him, and I saw him flinch slightly. It was the same reflex I had seen previously with Josephine. a stiffening, a slight hunching of the shoulders, a drilling of the hands into the pockets as if to present a smaller target. Beneath that knowing scrutiny, every flaw is revealed. For a second, he sees himself as she sees him, filthy, uncouth. Perversely, he acts out the role she has handed him, snarling, "What the fuck do you think you're looking at?" She gives him a startled look and backs away. Armand grins. "I'll see you later," she tells me, "and thank you." Caro follows me with visible chagrin. Caught between curiosity and her reluctance to talk to me, she is brisk and condescending. I gave her the facts with no elaboration. Renaud listened, expressionless as one of his statues. Georges tried for diplomacy, smiling sheepishly, delivered platitudes. No one offered me a lift back home.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you. God, there was so much in that.
Yeah.
I'm just so good at reading it. You're so good at reading it. It's so lovely.
Yeah, how are you so that's a stupid question. How are you so good at French accents? Do you speak French fluently or like?
I'm a deeply French person.
Very French.
Look at the stripes you're wearing. That is so French.
Yes, yeah, I've got my little Breton top on. I don't think I am good at French accents. If anyone French listens to this,
French words at least.
I expect they will die of laughter. But
Did anyone notice that this is a book before its time? Because it was written in the late 90s, but there was a couple of mentions. First of all, the dog lolled, and then someone else later lolled, and I was like, this is like before its time. This is amazing.
wow, Joanne
I
Harris.
thought I heard that. What was that about? What?
Why are they lolling? Lol.
Oh,
because
kind of rolling.
it's a word that means like rolling to the side.
They know.
Oh, sorry.
No, I didn't know.
Oh, really?
I'm lolling my head
Lolling
right now.
about. Yeah.
Also, the
What does it
strange
mean?
to lol is to like.
So yeah.
It's sort of kind of.
So my
Very
head is normal right
relaxed.
now, Carmen, and then now I'm lolling.
You can also loll around in bed.
Okay.
We have permission to loll around in bed. Excellent.
It looks like a lot of you are just lolling around in bed anyway.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I'm lolling
Sofa, excuse me.
I'm like flicking through the gallery view and I can just see like the very, very top of Martin's forehead. Hi, top of Martin's forehead.
Martin, that is amazing.
No,
I'm doing a bath.
Hello.
Rain, you're good, Rain. Go back down.
Oh, he's taking a bath.
Nice.
How exciting.
There
So how are we all feeling after those chapters?
I'm really glad Armand is okay.
Yeah.
I think she's my favorite character.
Yeah.
I want to be Armand when I'm old.
Yeah.
I think we're probably all
me
going to be
too.
Armand when we're old.
I want to be cranky and demanding.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice the strong Jesus parallels with Armand? Because there was a sort of Easter vibe going on there. Like when they said, go to the fridge, like a cave, and like open the fridge for the medicine. What was the medicine beside? Eggs. Easter eggs.
Gordon, you're
and
so
then
full of
they
shit.
thought she was dead, but she rose again.
Take your
Oh my God.
GCSE English
obvious.
analysis